Boker Tov, good morning, and welcome to the last day of the year. I am Rabbi David Vigler, and we're learning today the garments of the soul. We're learning Chassidus. This is the book we're learning. It is the Chassidic Heritage Series, available from kahotonline.com or from amazon.com. You can download it to your Kindle. And it's called Garments of the Soul because this discourse is the one that teaches us about the spiritual service, the mission of our generation. It takes the Moses of our generation, the Rebbe of our generation, to have the vision, to be able to see what is the mission, what is the goal, what is the purpose of our divine service, and thus reveals it to us in this stunning discourse called Vayishlach Yeshua, the Spies of Joshua, as every other part in Chassidus does. The Chassidus is the soul of Torah. Just like the soul animates life, gives purpose and flavor and joy and excitement to the body, so too Chassidus takes the stories, the laws, the surface level understanding of Torah and animates it with life. That is what we're doing in this discourse. Welcome to you, Marty from New York, Daniel from Palm Beach Gardens, Robert from Chicago. Good morning, Rabbi. May you and your family be inscribed for a happy, healthy, and sweet new year. Thank you, Robert. The same goes to you, my dear friend and fellow millionaire. We look forward to welcoming you back. I'm a little concerned about my YouTube feed, if the YouTube is actually alive. If anybody's able to tell me if YouTube is alive or not, I'm getting a very, very low turnout here. So I'm very concerned that it's actually active. In any event, the show goes on, and I'm going to continue with what we're learning now. So apt, so appropriate to the morning before Rosh Hashanah. You see, what we've been learning in recent weeks is about the spies of Joshua. I'm going to do a quick recap to explain what's going on. The Torah tells us a story. We read about it every single year, and we wonder, why on earth do we need to read the same old story every single year? But Chassidus shows us that the reason you need to read the story every single year is because this is not a story of someone else. It's not his story, it's your story. There is no word for history in Torah because this story is the story of your soul, of your mission upon this earth. The story we read about is the spies of Moses, who was sent to scout out the land before the Jews entered the land as a result of their negative, scathing reports against the land of Israel. The Jews complained, they rebelled against Hashem, and they were denied access. You got to watch what you pray for. They asked God not to take them into the promised land, so God said, okay. They wandered the next 40 years in the desert until they all died out, and it was the next generation, led by Joshua, that entered the promised land. We read this story in the Haftarah of the same Torah reading, that Joshua proceeds to send two spies. They were Caleb and Pinchas. He sends them to the city of Jericho. They scout out the land. They scout out the city, and they return in order to open the gates to allow the Jewish people, the soldiers, to conquer the city of Jericho and thus the rest of the land of Israel. Daniel, thank you for sharing today's video on Facebook. Fantastic. Really appreciate it. Elaine, I see that you're with me, which is great. Good to know that. Fantastic. Okay. So we explained earlier in the discourse that the earth-shattering paradigm shift that the Rebbe put into play was the realization that the story of the conquest of the land of Israel, the story of conquering the land of the 7 Canaanite nations and turning it into the Holy Land, is actually the story of conquering your own mission upon this earth. It is the story of your soul being sent, dispatched deep behind the dangerous enemy lines to planet Earth, to Olam Hazeh, to this earth, where your soul has to engage with your body and your animal soul in hand-to-hand combat in order to entice and convince your body and your animal soul to join the godly soul in divine service and serving God. The question, however, is how are we capable of conquering our promised land? How do we conquer our animal soul and our body? According to Moses, you've got to conquer the entirety of the land, the 7 nations. That would correspond to the 7 emotional attributes, which are the essence of your soul. According to Moses, you can change your essence. You can change how you feel. If you're a narcissist, you can become a kind person. If you are lazy, you can become a person of alacrity. If you are selfish, you can become selfless. According to Moses, you can change. And that's why Moses sends his spies throughout the entire land, throughout the 7 nations, to conquer the 7 emotional attributes of your soul. Joshua, on the other hand, was much more conservative. Joshua says you cannot change your 7 emotional attributes. You cannot conquer your 7 nations without divine assistance. What you can do on your own is conquer your Jericho. Jericho, we explained earlier in this discourse, corresponds to the garments of your soul, and that is your thought, speech, and action. You can only control and manipulate what you think about, what you speak about, and what you do, but you cannot control your essence, how you feel on the inside. And that's the difference between the 2 missions of Moses and Joshua. Moses, who sent his spies to the 7 nations, believed that you can change the essence of your soul. Joshua, who sent spies only to the city of Jericho, believed that an ordinary Jew cannot change the essence of his soul, but he can only change the garments of his soul. And this is the reason why the spies of Moses were sent not by divine command, but only by Moses' instruction. Because the mission to conquer your 7 emotional attributes is not something which God has empowered us to do. It's not something that every Jew is capable of doing. But the mission of Joshua was by divine command, because every single Jew has indeed been given the tools to conquer and control your thought, your speech, and your action. You cannot change the essence of your animal soul, but you can change what you choose to think about, speak about, and do. Remember, your souls are constantly in a bottleneck. You have a godly soul and you have an animal soul. This is foundational concept in Tanya. Your souls are constantly fighting for expression. There's a war, there's a battle at play. Now, which one of those souls is going to be expressed? It depends on you, on what you choose to express. If you choose to think, you can only think about one thing at a time. You can only speak about one thing at a time. You can only do one thing at a time. So if you choose right now to think about what I'm talking to you about, you're expressing your godly soul. But if you choose right now to think about, I don't know, the latest Netflix movie, then what you're doing is you're expressing your animal soul, right? And that is in your jurisdiction. You have the full control, the full power, what clothing you want to give your soul, what expression, what manifestation you want to give your soul in the attributes of thought, speech, and action. Now, what we've done in the discourse, and what we're holding right now, is that we put this idea into the context of the lexicon of Tanya. You see, Tanya speaks to us about 3 kinds of Jews. There is the tzaddik, the righteous, the rasha, the wicked, and the beinoni, who is the intermediary Jew. The tzaddik is the one that has transformed his animal soul to be fully subservient to his godly soul, like King David says in Psalms, "V'libi cholal b'kirbi," and my heart is hollow within me. I have actually hollowed out my animal soul. It is in full service of my godly soul. But that's not an ordinary Jew's achievement. Your ordinary Jew cannot reach that level of transformation. He can only reach the level of vigilance. And that is the level of the beinoni. The beinoni the intermediary Jew cannot change his animal soul, but he can constantly keep it at bay in thought, speech, and action. That's the reason why the mission of Joshua to become a beinoni, to control your thought, speech, and action, which we just read about in the Torah, by the way, this past Shabbos, the instruction to have self-mastery in thought, speech, and action. That is the mission of Joshua by divine command. Every Jew is able to become a Benini, and that is our divine mission. But to become a tzaddik is not in the capacity of every Jew, and that's why it's not by divine command. As we stand now at the threshold of Rosh Hashanah, and we think about how we stand in judgment before God, we wonder, what is it that God really expects of me? And it's this discourse which really puts things into the proper context, as you realize God is not expecting of you to be a perfect person. He's not expecting you not to have any nefarious desires, because that's how he created you. God created you as a flawed and imperfect human being, and that's how you're supposed to be. So don't feel bad about things that are out of your control. But what you should feel bad about is that which is in your control, and that you drop the ball. So don't feel bad that you desire things that are unholy or sinful. That's how God created you. The question is, did you act on those desires? That's where you are able to control yourself. Did you think, speak, and act the expression of your animal soul? Or were you like the Beinoni, who refused to allow expression of his animal soul in thought, speech, and action in the garments of the soul? Because you were vigilant and you kept your animal soul at bay. And that's the approach with which we approach Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Judgment. You can't come in with unrealistic expectations. This discourse puts into context who we are as human beings, what's expected of us, and more importantly, what's not expected of us. Because you can completely come out crushed thinking about what a horrible person you are because of all the dark, sinister desires that lie deep in the recesses of your heart. But when you realize that that's perfectly normal, God created you as a split personality with a godly soul that desires to serve God and an animal soul that desires to serve itself. You realize there's really nothing wrong with that. It's good. Tanya chapter 28 actually tells us that these two souls are in constant combat, in hand-to-hand combat. When one of them gets stronger, then what happens to the other one? It also gets stronger to match. So when you are doing teshuvah, when you are growing in your spirituality, do not expect your animal soul to become weaker. On the contrary, when your godly soul becomes stronger, anticipate that your animal soul will rise up to the challenge and it will become stronger as well. Sometimes a Jew who's on the path towards self-mastery will sometimes become disheartened with the realization that with all of my spiritual service, I'm desiring evil more than before. Obviously, I'm doing something wrong. And Tanya says, no, you're doing something right. The fact that you're trying to daven and you cannot concentrate right now because your mind is filled with all of these confusing and conflicting thoughts, that's because your animal soul is fighting with everything it has to fight against the intensified strength of your godly soul, right? But now we left with a very important question. We said, okay, now we can understand. So your animal soul, a Jew is empowered to become a Beinoni, to control your garments of your soul, your thought, speech, and action, and a Jew is incapable of controlling transforming his animal soul, of conquering his 7 nations. Therefore, it's important for us to know the story of the spies of Joshua, those that conquered the spiritual service of conquering your garments of your soul, your Jericho, your thought, speech, and action. But why on earth do we need to know the story of Moses? What, just to make us feel bad? Why do we need to know that Moses sent spies to the 7 nations corresponding to the conquest of the essence of your soul, of the 7 attributes, the 7 emotional attributes of your soul? We're not even capable of doing that. Why do I need to know about it? That's the question of the discourse in paragraph 5. Actually, it was paragraph 5. This is really where we're up to today. The question that we're up to today was paragraph 4, I think. Yeah, it's paragraph 4 is where we're up to. Why then are we instructed the story of the spies of Moses? It seems like it's there just to tease us, just to make us feel bad that somehow we're incapable of reaching this aspiration, which is Moses. Like Moses and his generation were able to conquer the 7 nations, but you can't do it. It's like a tease. What's the point? Here, the Rebbe gives us a beautiful insight, and he tells us that actually every single Jew might not be capable of becoming a tzaddik on his own, might not be capable of transforming the essence of his animal soul, the emotions of his animal soul, but you have to try. And indeed, we have been made to swear an oath before we were even born. Every single one of us was made to swear an oath before we were even born that we will strive to become a tzaddik. And no matter what happens, we will never be a rasha. We will never be wicked. We will never be sinful. A rasha is one who actually fails to be vigilant of his thought, speech, and action, and actually gives expression to his animal soul in thought, speech, and action. So we swear, I'll never become a tzaddik. I'll never become a rasha. I'll make sure to keep my animal soul from expressing itself in the garments of my soul in thought, speech, and action. And I will always strive to become a tzaddik. So it's this aspiration to become a tzaddik, which we may or may not reach. We have to try. Whether God opens the door and lets us in, that's out of your control. You have to try to reach self-mastery, and depending on your sincerity and the root of your soul and your soul story, your soul history, whatever, God will make that decision about whether he wants to open the door for you to become a tzaddik, to actually transform your inner struggle or not, and to keep you struggling forever, which is a major theme of Tanya. In any event, our mission is to try to transform the essence of our soul. How do we do that? By curbing our garments, by controlling our thought, speech, and action, and doing everything that we can through meditation to try to steer ourselves away from the desires of the sinful desires of our animal soul towards the holy desires of our godly soul. And that's the reason why the story of Moses' spies is incorporated in the story of in the Torah as a timeless lesson for us, like a mirage, for us to know that there's another peak that we have to aspire towards, right? This makes our divine service so exciting. Because instead of Judaism being like a one-dimensional thing that entails going to synagogue to read prayers in a language that you don't understand for 45 minutes a year, it now becomes in full color. It becomes meaningful and exciting as you realize that you're empowered to fulfill a mission that no one else upon this earth is capable of doing. Only you can conquer your body and your animal soul. Nobody else can do that. The question is, how far can you go? How far will you be able to reach? And that is something that only you are able to achieve, whether you'll reach the level of Beinani, in control of the garments of his soul, or even the level of Tzaddik, which is transformation. That depends on how much divine assistance is given to you along the way. Elaine is making a comment. This magnifies the achievement of the Baal Teshuvah for certain with regard to the strengthening of the Yetzer. Absolutely, Elaine. This is why it's so important, the tenacity of the Baal Teshuvah, to stay the course and not to give up. So let's read this idea that we've just discussed in chapter 4 on page 30. Not a long discourse, friends. I hope that you've ordered the book by now, because we're covering ground, right? There's only 6 paragraphs, so 6 chapters in this discourse, but it is such a beautiful, beautiful discourse that it's something which I want you to own and to have in your library for you to be able to review and to read over and over as you internalize and make this idea your own. So here it goes, page 30, chapter 4, Be a Tzaddik. It can be said that this explains the eternal relevance for every generation of the commandment to annihilate the 7 nations and to conquer the land. Why is it that every generation is commanded to conquer the land of Israel? Like it's a biblical commandment. Despite the fact that the conquest of their land represents the transforming of the 7 emotions of the animal soul to holiness. And this we know is only relevant to tzaddikim, to the righteous. Only the righteous are able to reach transformation. Everybody else is able to reach vigilance alone. Indeed, not every person merits this, as we discussed at length. Not every person is able to reach the level, the transformative power of the tzaddik. Since every Jew must do all in his power, but the answer is, so why then are we commanded in the Torah to conquer the 7 nations? since every Jew... Okay, just one point I wanted to point out to you. In note 24, it says, this is also evidenced by the fact that even though the 7 nations no longer exist, mostly they were wiped out by King David. The command to annihilate the 7 nations is counted as one of the 613 commandments. It still is one of the 613 commandments. According to Maimonides, it is positive commandment number 187, which is applicable to all generations. So it's a mitzvah eternally to transform, to conquer the 7 nations. That's quite a powerful concept, right? The answer is because you have to keep trying. Exactly. Since every Jew must do all in his power to fulfill the oath administered to him to be a tzaddik. Exactly. And you do that through engaging in the garments of your soul. This explains why the story of the sending of the spies by Moses to scout out the entire land is also written in the Torah. The word Torah means hayra'ah, instruction. It's an eternal lesson for every Jew in every place, since every Jew, no matter who you are, must scout out and examine his emotions and ensure that they are entirely devoted to God. Nevertheless, regarding Moses' spies, it is written, send for you, send for yourself by your own judgment. God tells Moses, I'm not telling you to send these spies. You send them on your own. I am not commanding you, since the primary command of scouting and examining oneself applies to thought, speech, and deed, the conquest of Jericho, over which every person has control, unlike the emotions of the heart. So it's a bit of an interesting situation. On the one hand, the spies of Moses are not sent by God. But at the same time, we also have a commandment in Torah, mitzvah number 187 out of 613, to conquer the 7 nations. The reason is because even though you can't do it necessarily on your own, you still have to try. Now the question is, what am I supposed to try? And this is where I'm going to leave you off today. What exactly am I supposed to try? How am I supposed to try to transform my 7 emotional attributes if I don't even have the tools to do that? Tanya is going to explain that the way to do that is by reaching perfect love and awe of God. And if I'm not able to reach that kind of love and awe of God, then how exactly am I supposed to transform my 7 emotions, the essence of my soul? It is this idea, which is the novelty, the chiddush, that the Rebbe is going to introduce to us, that there actually is a shortcut method to be able to transform your 7 emotional attributes, something which is indeed within the power of every ordinary Jew. Whilst at first glance we would dismiss this and say, you know what, this is not something which we're capable of achieving, the Rebbe is going to point out to us in the final 2 paragraphs of this discourse, what we're going to do next year after Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe is going to point out to us that there actually is a shortcut method that will allow you the capacity, the capability, the ability to actually cover ground in the transformation of the essence of your soul, and we'll be talking about that next time. For the meantime, I want to wish you all a ksiva v'chasima teva. May you be inscribed and sealed for good on this day of judgment, on Rosh Hashanah tonight. May you be inscribed in the book of life, of health, of wealth, and of happiness and prosperity, and most importantly, the book of Nachas, Yiddish, Chassidic Nachas, Jewish and Chassidic Nachas, which is the most important thing to us Jewish people. Remember that Rosh Hashanah is the head of the year. It is the most important day of the year. It's like brain surgery. What goes on in the brain is what impacts the rest of the body. And therefore, the time, every minute in Rosh Hashanah should not be engaged in wasting your time in frivolous conversation, but should be engaged in holiness, in the reading of the book of Psalms and the book of Tehillim. Study Torah, read Tehillim, engage the garments of your soul on Rosh Hashanah in holy things, thought, speech, and action, in holy things, especially the reading of Tehillim. And if you do that, if you engage the garments of your soul during Rosh Hashanah in holiness, the 48 hours of Rosh Hashanah, then that will have a profound impact upon your thought, speech, and action for the rest of the year, that they also should be engaged in holiness and in good things, in matters that are going to have a positive impact upon your life. With that, I want to thank you all for joining me here today. We're obviously not going to have Torah study on Tuesday and Wednesday because of the holiness of Rosh Hashanah, but we will resume Torah study on Thursday morning. We'll see you then. For those that are with us live, we look forward to celebrating with you Rosh Hashanah in person. And for those that are not with us live, we'll have you in thought, in our minds and hearts, and in our prayers. You pray for us, we'll pray for you. May we all experience a year which is filled with blessing, with joy, with happiness, no more pandemics, but a year of enlightenment, the coming of Mashiach. Thank you very much, everybody. Shalom, and have a wonderful day.
You ever mentioned to Rob?